Honorable ladies and gentlemen, my name is Onyebuchi. Yes, and as you can see, I need no introduction. So, without further ado, welcome back to The Resolve. If you're listening to this first, this is going to be the first official episode. I've recorded a few episodes before, but it wasn't in line with exactly what I wanted it to be. It was just like brief introduction so that you get to know me and, in other people's words, excuses as to why exactly I did not do the podcast and release it when I said I would. But yeah, so without further ado, let's get back to the resolve. Now today we're asking a very dangerous question. I believe it's a dangerous question, one that's probably going to annoy some of your uncles or your feminist best friends. But the question is, are we still raising men or emotional boys? Are we still raising men or emotional boys? These days it's confusing, bro. You open Twitter you open X and you see people arguing about whether a man should cry or if crying automatically disqualifies you from being called the head of the house. And it's not necessarily limited to crying, but I guess being a man and complaining, being a man and trying to air your feelings. Like, bro, what do you want from us, ladies and other men? What do you want from us? What do you really want from us? Are we not allowed to show emotion anymore? So anyway, let's start by defining what a man is. I think let's start by defining what a man is, or what we think of a man is supposed to look like, or what are the qualities of a man. I've come to understand that there's different versions of what people view as men. There's different versions of what people view as men, and I think that's what I'm going to talk about mainly in this podcast. So I think let's start with I don't know if I should call it the old school way of defining men, the old school blueprint. And I think it differs, but just ever so slightly, the difference between the way men are viewed here in Africa and in the West. I'm Zimbabwean and Nigerian at the same time. I'm a Nigerian-born Zimbabwean, if I can put it that way, and majority of my life is here in Africa. So I think let's start with the old school setup in Africa. Like, most men, the way I've seen it, the way I've grown up, most men suffer in silence. We're silent sufferers, if I can put it that way. Growing up, crying as a man, as a boy. Let's not talk about being a man. Let's talk about why you're still a boy before you even understand manhood. Bro, you weren't allowed to cry. Crying was like a taboo of a sort. If you got hurt, you'd hear your mom say, no, boys don't cry. You'd hear your dad tell you the same thing. He'd be like, yo, boys don't cry. Hold it in. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be strong. And I guess that wasn't limited to the physical aspect of it. I think even in the emotional sense and the psychological sense of it too. We aren't, from the African perspective mostly, we aren't seen as people who are supposed to break. You can't break, you shouldn't break, and especially not in front of people, especially not in public. You're not supposed to break. According to old school blueprint, if I should put it that way, I think let's use the old school blueprint as as what we're talking about here for this particular time. You could be broke, you could be bleeding, you could be heartbroken, in any kind of pain, but the only time that ever recognize you as a man is if you go through those things and just be quiet. Just don't show any sign of emotion. Don't show any sign of pain. You be king. Like, yo, he's going through all that and he hasn't told a person. You'd be king. You couldn't talk about it. And I'm saying couldn't. I'm using past tense because, I feel these days people are slowly changing, and people view things differently. But people view you as a king, bro. And it literally still happens now. People, men are mostly respected when they go through whatever they go through, and literally don't share it with anybody, or literally don't cry about it. Suffer in silence. I remember, I don't see it too commonly these days, but growing up, earlier, bro, grown men would it's funny that I say grown men. People would dismiss serious diseases. People would dismiss serious ailments. You see, yo, brother, this man is coughing blood. This man is literally coughing blood. But that doesn't, it'll be just easily dismissed. You hear somebody go, nah, it's just a small malaria. Our dads, if you've got Nigerian parents, or if you're in Nigeria, malaria, it's malaria. Sir, bro, you've got tuberculosis, you've got TB, and you said you got malaria. Since when do you start coughing blood when you've got malaria? And then they just brush it off. Oh, by the way, for people in other countries, malaria isn't a big disease to those who... In Africa, malaria is not some huge disease as they make it out to be out there, especially if you treat it on time. I know out there, in the West, malaria is something serious. It's hearing you've got HIV and AIDS. Nah, HIV and AIDS got nothing. No, scrap that. No. Malaria can't even be classified in the same group of diseases as HIV and AIDS. It's literally just one of those things. I mean, you go to Mozambique, you go to Nigeria, it's just I've got a flu. So, in case you're wondering why I use that particular example. But yeah, growing up, that was what we used to see. And, as a man of the house, you weren't expected to complain. And there was this, should I use the word stoicism associated with being a man? You deserved your respect regardless of the situation. Nobody would question you as a man. Bro, if your dad told you, I am the man of this house, if your husband told you, I am the man of this house, bro, there was no questions. Even if he didn't pay the rent, even if he didn't dress well, bro, your answer was always, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. To Nigerians, it should be pretty normal. Yes, sir. Calling your dad sir. Your dad calls you sir. Yeah, it should be normal. I know for others it's not. I think in the old school sense, when I'm talking about the old school blueprint, it wasn't just limited to Africa, but I think it just had I think in the Western world, according to how I've done my research and what I've seen, the stories I've listened to, I think it was the same vibe. But the whole breadwinner energy, I am the man of the house, the respect and everything like that. I think it was the same vibes. I think it's the same vibe as, judging off of what I saw, even in the way I listen to a lot of American stories. I'll use America as, a prime example, because I hear people say, my dad was really abusive and you look at the patterns, it's a little bit the same. But I think now the economy is the way the world's economy, not just particularly Africa or United States, but anywhere you are in the world, I don't think the economy allows for that kind of stoicism anymore. Although we still have men who are out there who are stoic to pain and don't feel pain literally, but in the breadwinner sense, yeah, I think that's changed. that really has changed over the years. Like I was saying, due to the economy, due to the economy, the current economy we live in doesn't really permit for you to keep on that breadwinner energy, because now, I mean, rentals have gone high, man. Food, just life itself, being able to be alive, just being alive is a huge expense on its own, and it's really hard to win and say, you know what, I'm the breadwinner. You might just claim to be the man of the house in terms of like what you face on your own, but calling yourself the man of the house based off of what you provide, I mean, I think that adds a whole new complexity to what defines a man. It adds a whole new complexity to what defines a man, and masculinity is not limited to just paying rentals on bills and being the breadwinner, or being able to handle pain and suffering better or in a different way from the other gender. But yeah, so don't take it I'm going off topic. I'm not going off topic. We're still on the same topic. Are we raising men or emotional boys? Let's come to the new generation. We use the old school blueprint, but I think now let's jump to the new generation. The soft life era. And I think, in my opinion, this is dangerous, because like everybody's redefining what a man means in this particular new generation. The soft life era. What defines a man these days is different. I mean, in the West, you've got men saying it's okay to cry. I've seen it on TikTok. Men crying on TikTok. The soft guy era, the love yourself era, the self-love era. I've seen men do it. And there's this whole trend, like, it's masculine to heal. I'm not saying this in a mocking sense, because like people cope with different situations or different things in different ways, but nowadays that's the trend. That you can't really define what a man is, because it's so different from what we used to know, in the old school, like in the old days. So like I said, on TikTok we've got people crying, we've got men crying, telling their stories about how they met a girl and they broke her hearts. But I think that's limited to the West. It's not too common in Southern Africa, in most African countries, but I think South Africa has a lot of those trends. South Africa is like a mini America. But I think yeah, I'm not bugging, actually. I've seen it only like or mostly in Western countries. Try that in an African household. You start crying, a girl broke my heart, and all right, let's not talk about relationships. Let's talk about, like, what we initially talked about you being stoic and not expressing emotion, just staying strong, being a silent sufferer. Nowadays, like I said, the contrast. Nowadays you see on TikTok men crying and ish. Bro, you come and you tell your mom that you broke up with a girl and you're crying about it or being anxious about it. I think limited to the West. In the West, yes, it's an actual thing. But in Southern Africa, hey, yo, I've seen men talk about anxiety on TikTok, but try that in an African household, bro. Your mom's going to call a family meeting like, yo, what's anxiety? What's anxiety? Is it a disease? Have you prayed about it? You get questions like, how can you be anxiety when you have eaten? I watched a TikTok recently where this I think this girl had gone for therapy for being for anxiety and all that stuff, and the Zimbabwean mother is like, so how's your anxiety now? Like, you might end up reporting us because your anxiety's gone up, like it's like BP, like blood pressure gone up. But yeah, it goes back to the question: are we building healthier men or weak ones? Because I feel like nowadays, with what I've defined as the old school men and the soft guy era that we're in, because there's a thin line between being emotionally aware and emotionally fragile. Take for example, look at what example can we give? Michael B. Jordan, the actor, that dude who was on the Wakanda movie on Black Panther. He's the poster boy for most modern, most modern boys, like what they view as masculinity: emotional, stylish, respectful, successful. But then people clown him. I've seen people clown him for being too soft when he shows his feelings. Meanwhile, we have people like 50 Cent. I think he's a good example I can give. 50 Cent, he still represents that old fashioned. I don't know why I didn't say this from the start. But like, we have people like 50 Cent. He represents that old school masculinity I was talking about, like that stoic masculinity, like the don't mess with me type of man. So we've got two extremes, and both, I respect both, whether you're the old school blueprint or you believe the soft guy era. I respect both, and I also do criticize both. I respect both, but I do criticize both. And I mean, like, where's the balance though? I don't know about where most of you put the balance on this, but like, this is where I put the balance. We're now at that part where social media ruins everything. We're living a life where social media runs and ruins everything. We've got podcasts of people. We've got podcasts of. We've got videos and podcasts and stuff. There are alpha males out there, and there are men talking about a man should never cry, a man should never simp, a man should never listen to a woman. And then on the other side, we've got people saying men should not express their emotions, men shouldn't cry, and stop trying to lead everything. I think that's the new school blueprint, if I could put it that way. And because social media runs and literally ruins everything, we now have this chaotic scene. It's chaos. Because one side is building soldiers and the other is building poets and puppets and puppies. And I'm just here like, yo, can we just be humans? Like, can't we just be humans instead? Can't we just live as ordinary human beings and not judge each other? But at the same time, even if we don't judge each other, we're allowing certain things to go, not talk to, like without talking about them, without addressing them, often leaving people confused. In my opinion, that alpha energy, that I am the man energy, too much of it, I think it breeds pride. It breeds pride. It breeds loneliness. It breeds pride. It breeds loneliness. Let me take you back to that old school blueprint of what defines a man. What defines a man? I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but I think a fair majority of people can agree with me. There are times when your dad came home and everybody just stand up and leave the dining room or the living room. There was a time when we were growing up where when your parents came home, you'd literally stand up. You just good evening. You stand up and leave. I don't think, in my opinion, that's a very lonely life. Starting with your family, and in the event you own your own business or you're the boss wherever you work, and you've got that old school don't mess with me type of masculinity, glued to you, I feel it breeds loneliness. I don't think that's a life that people enjoy much, in as much as they want us to believe that, this is good for me. I don't think it's good for them. On the other hand, we've got the soft life, and I feel like too much of that soft life energy brings indecision and entitlement. You can't make your own decisions. You always have to rely on people. You always have to rely on social media, and that entitlement. You feel like you can just go on the internet and complain about everything, and something has to be done about it. You feel like you're entitled to something being done about it, or you're entitled to someone else cleaning up after your mess. And now we're raising such a generation. We're raising a generation of guys who either feel everything too much or nothing at all. It's either I'm a stoic man, I feel nothing, I don't feel pain, I don't feel this, I don't feel emotion. Or we have those guys who every little problem in their life, they have to talk about it. His wife doesn't talk to him, he comes and complains about it on social media. A girl chops his money, he has to come and complain about it on social media. He gets blue ticked, he has to come and talk about it on social media. We now have so many walking red flags. Or so many we've got many walking red flags and walking tissues. I think one example that I'll give, is Will Smith. You remember that time at the Oscars? Was it Oscars or Grammys? It was the Oscars, I think, where he where he slapped what's his name? Where he slapped this guy, Chris Tucker. No, it wasn't Chris Tucker. It was Chris Rock. Some people said, some people on Will Smith's side, and they're like, you know what? That is a man defending his woman. That is a man defending his woman. While we had other people go, you know what? That right there is a man losing emotional control. And why I brought up this example is to show the division that we have between those two type of men I've just explained. It's the same moment, but two completely opposite readings. It's the same moment, but two completely opposite readings. And that's the modern man's dilemma. You can't be too cold, but you can't be too emotional either. Like, bro, think about it. How are we supposed to survive that? How? So anyway, I've come to a resolve. After all, this is the resolve. And this is my take on masculinity, on whether we're raising emotional boys or we're raising men. I think what we used to define as men, that tough masculinity, versus what people deem as men, or like the men we have these days. My take is like, there is a steep gradient, there is a big difference, but I don't think masculinity is dying. I don't know if anybody said so, but I think it's an evolution, and we just need to stop mistaking vulnerability for weakness and, stoicism for strength. It's not all modern men who are weak, and it's not all of those men who appear, the old school version, the don't mess with me type of men that are strong. I think you can be strong and still be soft. You can lead and still have an ear to listen. You can cry on Monday and still conquer on Tuesday. You can still fall and stand up. I mean, because if we're being honest, most of our fathers suffered silently. And it was, people say that's strength. People say that's what defines being a man. That's what makes you a man. But that pain didn't disappear. It didn't disappear. It was passed down. And now we inherit men. And at that time we inherited men who couldn't talk. You'd feel pain, but you couldn't talk about it. And now we have the soft guy era where we have men who get hurt or men who feel pain but who can talk about it. However, we can't have too much of the latter and too much of the former. So if toughness builds houses, emotions build homes. I don't know if that makes sense. Toughness builds houses and emotions build homes. And both are needed, to be honest. I think that's why we have the mother and father dynamic. You need toughness and you need emotion. So if you ask me, are we raising men or emotional boys? I think none of the above. We should be raising complete men who can fight the world but still feel their pain. We should be raising men, complete men who can fight the world but still feel their pain. You can be stoic in your fight. You can be, is it stoic or stoic? You can be stoic in your fight. You can be tough out there in your fight. But when you come home, you need to talk about it. But I don't condone the whole social media thing. But if you can come and talk about it with your wife, with your partner, with your friends. Anyway, that, my honorable people, is the resolve. We need both. Not too much of the former, not too much of the latter, but we need both. The mission isn't to harden men or soften them. It's to balance them. As a man, you should find your balance. So next time somebody tells you to man up, tell them cool. I'm still gonna find my feelings, my guy. Still going to find my feelings. I don't know if this podcast made sense to you, but if it did, please make sure to like and subscribe. Stay grounded, stay blessed. Always remember to pray. Jesus loves you. And always, as always, stay